Sometimes, the people who destroy your life don't arrive wearing the face of an enemy. Sometimes, they wear a beautiful smile, carry an expensive handbag, and stand beside you promising forever. For Kang Min-jae, that lesson would come too late. If someone had told him that the woman he planned to marry would one day raise her hand against the woman who gave him life, he would have laughed. Welcome back, incredible souls. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, if someone publicly humiliated your mother or the person who raised you, what would you do? And if you enjoy emotional stories with powerful lessons and unforgettable twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Afro-Korean TV. We've got many more stories like this waiting for you. Let's see what happens next in this story, because love has a strange way of making intelligent people ignore obvious warning signs. And by the time the truth reveals itself, the damage has already been done. Every morning inside the prestigious Kang estate followed the same peaceful rhythm. Before billion-dollar meetings, before television interviews, before the endless responsibilities of leading one of Korea's fastest-growing corporations. Min-jae always made time for breakfast with his mother. The dining room overlooked a carefully maintained garden where cherry blossom trees danced gently in the morning breeze. Mrs. Kang Hye-jin placed a steaming bowl of seaweed soup in front of her son. "You still look too thin," she teased with a gentle smile. Min-jae laughed. "Mother, everyone at the company says I've gained weight." "They're being polite." She reached across the table and adjusted his tie, just as she had when he was a nervous teenager preparing for university entrance exams. No cameras, no servants hovering nearby. Just a mother and her son. Moments like these reminded Min-jae why he worked so hard. Not for awards, not for wealth, but because years ago, his mother had worked 3 jobs after his father's sudden death, just to keep food on their table. She had sold her jewelry so he could stay in school. She skipped meals so he would never know they were struggling. Now, everything he owned belonged to her as much as it belonged to him. Or at least, that's what he believed, because life was quietly preparing to test those words. The front gate opened. A small taxi rolled inside the enormous estate. Out stepped a woman carrying a single suitcase. She wasn't dressed in designer labels. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. Her name was Adaobi Okafor. She had traveled thousands of miles from Nigeria for one purpose: to earn an honest living. The head housekeeper greeted her warmly. "Welcome to the Kang residence." Adaobi bowed politely. "Thank you." She looked around quietly. Years of working for wealthy families had taught her something important. You could learn everything about a house by watching how its employees behaved. The gardeners barely spoke. The maids smiled nervously. Even the security guards seemed unusually tense. It wasn't fear of the owner. It was fear of someone else. Someone whose arrival could silence an entire room. Adaobi noticed, but she said nothing. She simply carried her suitcase inside. Mrs. Kang welcomed Adaobi personally. "You must be tired after such a long journey." Adaobi smiled politely. "I'll be fine, ma'am." Mrs. Kang gently held her hand. "In this house, nobody serves me while they're hungry." She instructed the kitchen staff to prepare breakfast before discussing work. Adaobi blinked in surprise. Kindness like this had become rare. Most employers demanded loyalty before offering respect. Mrs. Kang offered respect first. In that moment, Adaobi silently promised herself something. As long as she worked in this house, she would never allow this gentle woman to suffer if she could help it. She had no idea how soon that promise would be tested. Later that afternoon, luxury vehicles began arriving. Wedding planners filled the mansion with samples of imported flowers, crystal decorations, designer fabrics, and elaborate seating arrangements. The Kang estate had become the center of preparations for one of Seoul's most anticipated weddings. The bride-to-be, Han Seo-yeon, beautiful, elegant, sophisticated. The media adored her. Business magazines called her the perfect future wife for Korea's most eligible billionaire. From the outside, she looked flawless, but appearances are often expensive disguises. Seo-yeon entered the mansion wearing a tailored cream-colored dress and dark sunglasses. The atmosphere changed instantly. Employees straightened their posture. Conversation stopped. She removed her sunglasses without acknowledging anyone. Her eyes swept across the room like an inspector searching for mistakes. You! She pointed toward a young maid arranging flowers. Why are those lilies facing the window instead of the guests? The frightened maid apologized immediately. I'm sorry, Miss Han. Sorry doesn't create excellence. The room became silent. Mrs. Kang noticed the young employee trembling. It's all right, she said softly. They're only flowers. Seo-yun smiled. But it wasn't warmth. It was irritation hidden beneath perfect manners. Mother, details matter, Mrs. Kang gently replied. People matter more. For just a second, something cold flashed through Seo-yun's eyes. Then it disappeared behind another polished smile. Adaobi saw it. She said nothing, but she remembered it. The days passed. Small incidents began piling up. One afternoon, an elderly housekeeper accidentally spilled tea while carrying a heavy tray. Before anyone could help, Seo-yun's voice echoed through the hallway. Do you expect wealthy guests to accept this level of incompetence? The elderly woman bowed repeatedly. I'm very sorry. Being sorry doesn't clean expensive carpets. Mrs. Kang quietly knelt beside the older employee. It's all right. I'll help. Imagine that. The owner of the mansion cleaning spilled tea herself, while the future daughter-in-law criticized someone old enough to be her grandmother. Adaobi watched everything from a distance. Experience whispered the same warning it always had. Cruelty rarely arrives all at once. It grows, one small moment at a time. That evening, Adaobi stood alone outside beneath the garden lights. She removed her phone, not to call anyone, not to scroll through messages. She opened the camera. Years earlier, a wealthy employer had falsely accused her of stealing jewelry she had never touched. She nearly lost everything. Since then, whenever powerful people mistreated those without a voice, she quietly preserved the truth, not for revenge, for protection. She slipped the phone back into her apron. Hopefully, she would never need it. Inside another part of the city, Han Seo-yun sat across from a man inside a private luxury lounge. Park Ji-hoon, Min-jae's closest friend, and the company's trusted legal advisor. No delays, Seo-yun whispered. The wedding must happen. Ji-hoon nodded. The paperwork is almost complete. And his mother? A faint smile crossed Ji-hoon's face. She won't be a problem much longer. Neither of them noticed. Someone walking past the lounge glanced briefly through the glass before continuing on. A stranger, an insignificant passerby, or so they believed. Back at the mansion, Mrs. Kang stood on her balcony watching workers prepare for the engagement celebration. Adaobi approached with a warm cup of tea. You've been on your feet all day, ma'am. Mrs. Kang smiled gratefully. Thank you. After a long silence, she spoke almost to herself. I only want my son to be happy. Adaobi looked toward the glittering decorations filling the garden. Sometimes, beautiful things hide dangerous truths. She didn't know why that thought entered her mind, but she couldn't shake it. And inside those glowing walls, everyone believed they were preparing for a celebration. None of them realized they were preparing for the moment that would tear an entire family apart. Sometimes, a family's future doesn't fall apart because of one bad decision. It falls apart because dozens of small warnings were ignored, until one moment made denial impossible. For Kang Min-jae, that moment arrived on the night of his engagement dinner. The Kang estate had never looked more magnificent. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the grand ballroom. Fresh white orchids decorated every table. A live orchestra played softly as Seoul's most influential families arrived one after another. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Business executives, politicians, actors, foreign investors. Every guest came to witness what newspapers were already calling the wedding of the year. Inside the mansion, dozens of staff hurried from room to room. Among them was Adaobi. Unlike everyone else, she wasn't distracted by the decorations. She was watching people. She noticed how the younger maids became anxious whenever Seo-yun walked past. She noticed the forced smiles, the lowered heads, the silence. Fear had a sound, and tonight, it echoed through every hallway. Min-jae descended the grand staircase wearing a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. The applause began immediately. Guests admired the successful CEO who had built an empire before turning 35. But his attention wasn't on the crowd. He searched for only two people, his mother and the woman he intended to marry. Mrs. Kang entered wearing a graceful navy blue handbag embroidered with delicate silver flowers. The room instantly softened. Several elderly guests smiled warmly. She wasn't dressed to impress. She was dressed with dignity. Min-jae walked over and gently held her arm. "You look beautiful, mother," she laughed. "I've reached the age where comfortable shoes are more important than beauty." The two shared a quiet laugh. Across the room, someone watched them with growing irritation. Han Seo-yeon. She approached gracefully, smiling for photographers before linking her arm through Min-jae's. To everyone watching, they looked like the perfect couple. She greeted Mrs. Kang politely. "You look lovely this evening." "Thank you, dear," Mrs. Kang replied kindly. "I've been praying tonight brings you both happiness." Seo-yeon's smile remained, but something behind her eyes hardened. She never liked hearing people mention prayers. She preferred plans, control, certainty. Happiness was something to be managed, not wished for. As dinner began, conversations flowed easily. Executives discussed investments. Families exchanged congratulations. Wine glasses clinked gently. For a while, everything appeared exactly as it should. Then came the speeches. A company director praised Min-jae's leadership. Another guest congratulated the future bride. Finally, someone invited Mrs. Kang to say a few words. She stood slowly. The room fell silent. Her voice remained gentle. "I've watched my son work harder than anyone should." She smiled toward Min-jae. "He believes success is measured by money." She shook her head playfully. "But I taught him something different." Several guests leaned forward. Mrs. Kang continued. "If two families are becoming one." She paused. "Wouldn't it be wonderful if part of our wedding budget could help children who don't even have enough food to eat?" Silence, not uncomfortable silence. Thoughtful silence. Then, a few guests nodded. One elderly businessman even began clapping softly. "It's a beautiful idea." Others agreed. "What a generous suggestion." Min-jae smiled proudly. His mother's kindness had always inspired people. He reached for Seo-yeon's hand, but she had already pulled it away. Something inside Seo-yeon snapped. She wasn't hearing applause. She wasn't hearing admiration. She heard humiliation. In her mind, Mrs. Kang had stolen the spotlight, made everyone believe she was selfish. Years of pride, fear, hidden financial pressure, and unbearable desperation erupted at once. She stood abruptly. The orchestra stopped playing. Every conversation ended. Mrs. Kang looked confused. "Seo-yeon." Then, without warning, Seo-yeon's hand flew across the table. Smack! The sound echoed through the ballroom. Mrs. Kang stumbled sideways. Her cheek reddened instantly. A wine glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered against the marble floor. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Hundreds of guests stared in complete disbelief. Min-jae remained frozen, not because he didn't love his mother, but because his mind refused to believe what his eyes had just witnessed. His entire world had stopped. That single slap changed everything. But what happened next shocked everyone in that mansion even more. Before we continue, comment respect if you believe no one should ever disrespect their parents or the elderly. And if you're still watching, like, subscribe and tell me what time is it and where you're watching from. Mrs. Kang slowly lifted her trembling hand to her cheek. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She simply looked at her son, not with anger, not even disappointment, only heartbreak. It wasn't the slap that wounded her most, it was the silence. Before anyone else reacted, Adaobi stepped forward. She gently helped Mrs. Kang regain her balance. Her movements were calm, respectful, steady. She didn't glare at Seo-yeon. She didn't insult her. Instead, she carefully adjusted Mrs. Kang's sleeve before turning toward the stunned guests. Then she faced Seo-yeon. The ballroom became so quiet that every word carried effortlessly across the room. Adaobi spoke softly. "The measure of a person's character," she paused, "is never how they treat people who can benefit them." Her eyes met Seo-yeon's. "It is how they treat those who cannot fight back." Complete silence. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. Seo-yeon's face burned with humiliation. No one had ever challenged her publicly, especially not a maid. Trying to regain control, Seo-yeon pointed angrily toward Adaobi. Who do you think you are? Adaobi remained composed. A woman doing what everyone else was too shocked to do. Several employees lowered their heads. They wanted to applaud, but fear held them still. Finally, Min-jae found his voice. Seo-yeon. His words barely escaped his lips. What have you done? Instead of apologizing, she laughed nervously. It was only a slap. She embarrassed me in front of everyone. The sentence hit Min-jae harder than the slap itself, not because of what she had done, but because she believed she was justified. Across the ballroom, phones quietly appeared. One guest had recorded everything, then another, and another. Within minutes, the video began spreading online. No public relations team could stop it. No amount of money could erase it. The scandal had escaped the mansion. Mrs. Kang gently touched Min-jae's arm. Her voice was almost a whisper. It's all right. But it wasn't. Nothing would ever be all right again. As guests quietly began leaving the celebration, Adaobi noticed something unusual. Park Ji-hoon wasn't shocked. He wasn't comforting anyone. Instead, he slipped outside while secretly sending a message on his phone. His expression wasn't one of panic. It looked prepared. Adaobi's instincts immediately awakened. Something about tonight didn't feel accidental anymore. She couldn't explain why, but deep inside, she felt the slap was only the beginning, not the end. That same night, the engagement video exploded across social media. Millions watched in disbelief. Television stations interrupted programming. News anchors debated whether Korea's most admired businessman had ignored warning signs about the woman he planned to marry. By sunrise, the entire country knew what had happened inside the Kang mansion, but the public had only seen one shocking moment. They hadn't seen the months of quiet cruelty that came before it, and hidden inside Adaobi's phone was evidence capable of destroying far more than an engagement. She looked down, then whispered to herself, "The truth always waits for the right moment." The internet has a short memory, but betrayal leaves scars that don't disappear with tomorrow's headlines. By sunrise, the video of Han Seo-yeon slapping Mrs. Kang had spread across the country. News channels replayed it. Social media exploded with outrage. Comment sections were flooded with one painful question. Why didn't Min-jae protect his own mother? It was a question he couldn't answer. Not because he didn't know the truth, but because he couldn't forgive himself for freezing when it mattered most. The Kang mansion no longer felt like home. The laughter from the engagement dinner had been replaced by silence. Employees walked softly through the hallways, afraid that even their footsteps might disturb the heavy atmosphere. Mrs. Kang remained in her room. She insisted she was fine. She even smiled whenever someone checked on her. But smiles could hide pain just as easily as tears. Adaobi gently placed a tray of tea beside her. "You should rest, ma'am." Mrs. Kang nodded. Then she looked toward the window. "My son blames himself." Adaobi remained quiet. "He has a good heart." Mrs. Kang sighed. "Sometimes a good heart takes too long to become a brave one." Those words stayed with Adaobi long after she left the room. Meanwhile, Min-jae requested an emergency meeting with Seo-yeon. They met inside a private lounge overlooking the Han River. The atmosphere was painfully cold. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Min-jae broke the silence. "Why?" Seo-yeon folded her arms. "Because she embarrassed me. My mother suggested helping children. She made me look selfish." Min-jae stared at her in disbelief. "So your answer was to slap her?" Seo-yeon's expression hardened. She needed to understand her place. Those 5 words shattered something inside him. Not just his trust, his future. For the first time since falling in love, he realized he had been in love with the woman she pretended to be, not the woman sitting across from him. He slowly removed the engagement ring from his pocket. "I can't marry someone who humiliates my mother." Seo-yeon's confident smile disappeared. "You'll regret this." "No." He stood. "My regret is that I didn't see you sooner." Back at the mansion, Adaobi stood alone in the staff quarters. She opened a locked folder on her phone. Dozens of videos appeared. Short clips, hidden recordings, months of quiet cruelty. One video showed Seo-yeon forcing an elderly housekeeper to apologize for dropping a spoon. Another captured her mocking an employee's accent. Another revealed her insulting Mrs. Kang behind closed doors. Adaobi watched silently. She never intended to become the keeper of these secrets, but experience had taught her one painful lesson. Without proof, power almost always wins. What would you have done? Would you release the recordings immediately? Or stay silent to protect yourself? Share your answer in the comments because I'd love to hear your opinion. And if you're enjoying this story, hit the like button and subscribe to Afro Korean TV. It really helps us bring you more cinematic stories like this. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. It was Min-jae. I need to ask you something. She nodded. He hesitated. Have you ever seen her behave this way before? Adaobi looked at him carefully. Then she handed him her phone. Watch. For the next 20 minutes, Min-jae watched every recording. His breathing became heavier with each clip. He watched servants humiliated. He watched his mother insulted. He watched himself, walking past moments that now seemed painfully obvious. He had been so consumed by work, so determined to believe in love, that he had ignored every warning. When the final video ended, he sat in complete silence. I'm sorry, he whispered. Adaobi looked at him. Don't apologize to me. He lowered his head. I failed everyone in this house. No, she answered gently. You failed to see the truth. Now you've seen it. What you do next is what matters. Her words didn't comfort him. They challenged him. Across the city, Seo-yeon wasn't grieving the broken engagement. She was panicking. Her phone rang repeatedly. Debt collectors, private lenders, threatening messages. The wedding had been her escape. Without Min-jae, everything she'd hidden was collapsing. She immediately called one person she believed would save her. Park Ji-hoon. I need your help. Ji-hoon answered calmly. Meet me. They met inside an underground parking garage. Seo-yeon rushed toward him. The wedding is over. I know. You said everything would be fine. Ji-hoon smiled. It still can be. She looked relieved, until he continued. As long as you do exactly what I say. He handed her a folder. Inside were legal documents involving the Kang family's properties. I've already prepared everything. She frowned. What is this? The future. Unknown to Seo-yeon, unknown even to Min-jae. Ji-hoon's betrayal had begun months before the engagement. He hadn't helped Seo-yeon because he loved her. He had used her. She was simply another piece on his chessboard. That evening, Min-jae gathered every household employee inside the mansion. The room was filled with uncertainty. Many feared they were about to lose their jobs because of the scandal. Instead, Min-jae bowed, a full 90-degree bow. The employees gasped. I owe every one of you an apology. I allowed someone into this home who made you afraid. I didn't see your suffering. But from today, no one in this house will ever be punished for speaking the truth. Several staff members quietly wiped away tears. For years, no employer had ever apologized to them. Mrs. Kang watched from the hallway. Pride filled her eyes. Not because her son was successful, because at last, he was becoming courageous. Just when hope seemed to be returning, Adaobi noticed something strange. While reviewing the recordings once more, she heard voices in the background of one forgotten video. She increased the volume. Two people were speaking in another room. One voice belonged to Seo-yeon. The other made Adaobi's blood run cold. Park Ji-hoon. She replayed it again and again. Then she heard one sentence clearly. Once the assets are transferred, his mother won't have any control left. Adaobi froze. This was never just about a marriage. Someone had been planning to destroy the Kang family from the inside. She immediately looked toward Min-jae's office. He thought the worst was already over. He had no idea. The greatest betrayal hadn't even been revealed yet. Some storms announced themselves with rain. Others arrive wearing the face of your closest friend. Some betrayals come from enemies. The worst ones come from the people you've trusted long enough to stop questioning. For Kang Min-jae, the greatest enemy had never been standing across from him. He had been standing beside him all along. Adaobi didn't waste another second. Holding her phone tightly, she hurried toward Min-jae's study. He looked up from a mountain of legal documents Exhaustion etched across his face. Adaobi, is something wrong? She locked the office door behind her. I think you need to hear something. She replayed the audio from the hidden recording. At first, only muffled voices, static, the distant clinking of glasses. Then, the conversation became unmistakably clear. Park Ji-hoon's voice. Once the asset transfer is complete, Mrs. Kang won't have any authority left. Seo-yeon's voice followed. And Min-jae, Ji-hoon chuckled. He trusts me too much to notice. Silence filled the office. Min-jae stared at the phone as though it had become something alive. No, he whispered. No, that's impossible. Park Ji-hoon wasn't just his lawyer. He was his childhood friend, the boy who stood beside him at his father's funeral, the man who celebrated every business success, the person he trusted with everything, or so he thought. The memories came rushing back. School competitions, university graduations, late nights building the company together. Every memory now carried a question. Was any of it real? Adaobi quietly broke the silence. Sometimes trust becomes the perfect disguise. Min-jae lowered his head. I brought him into my mother's life. His voice cracked. I introduced the people who nearly destroyed her. The next morning, Min-jae ordered a complete internal audit of every legal document Ji-hoon had handled during the past 3 years. The company's finance department worked without sleep. Lawyers filled conference rooms. Accountants examined thousands of transactions. Hours later, the first report arrived. It was worse than anyone imagined. Several family properties had already been placed under shell companies. Investment accounts had been quietly redirected. Ownership structures had been altered so gradually that nobody noticed. Everything had been perfectly legal. On paper, because the signatures belonged to Min-jae himself. His stomach tightened. I signed these. The chief auditor nodded. Yes, you approved them personally. Min-jae closed his eyes. He remembered. Late-night meetings, stacks of paperwork, Ji-hoon always saying the same thing. Just routine documents. Without reading carefully, he had signed them. Not out of carelessness, out of trust. Trust. One signature at a time. Meanwhile, Seo-yeon sat alone inside her luxury apartment. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Debt collectors, banks, private lenders. Her elegant life was collapsing faster than she could comprehend. She called Ji-hoon repeatedly. No answer. Finally, he picked up. You ignored me. I've been busy. You promised we'd fix this. There was a long pause. Then Ji-hoon laughed. Not kindly, coldly. You really thought I needed you? Seo-yeon's face drained of color. What do you mean? You were useful. That's all. He ended the call. For the first time in years, Han Seo-yeon experienced what she had made so many others feel. Abandonment. Back at the Kang mansion, Mrs. Kang quietly watered flowers in the garden. Despite everything, she refused to let bitterness consume her. Adaobi joined her. You should be resting, Mrs. Kang smiled. When flowers are neglected, they stop blooming. Adaobi looked at her thoughtfully. And people? Mrs. Kang's eyes drifted toward the house where her son was fighting to save everything. People bloom again when someone believes they're still worth saving. Adaobi smiled. Those words stayed with her. That afternoon, Min-jae requested an emergency board meeting. The conference room filled quickly. Executives whispered nervously. Shareholders demanded answers. Television crews waited outside the company headquarters. Everyone expected another carefully prepared corporate statement. Instead, Min-jae stood alone at the front of the room. No script, no public relations team, just the truth. I made a mistake. The room became silent. I trusted someone without verifying his actions. He placed dozens of forged documents on the conference table. My negligence allowed fraud to enter this company. Several executives looked shocked. Others lowered their heads. Min-jae continued. I could hide my mistake. I could blame someone else. But leadership means accepting responsibility before demanding it from others. The room remained perfectly still. Then, one elderly board member slowly stood. I've served this company for 30 years. He looked directly at Min-jae. This is the first time I've seen a chairman choose honesty over reputation. One by one, others stood beside him. Not because Min-jae was perfect, because he had finally become accountable. Outside, police vehicles quietly arrived. Investigators entered the building carrying warrants. Ji-hoon had been located. Evidence from the audit, combined with Adaobi's recordings, was enough to begin criminal proceedings. As officers approached him, Ji-hoon remained strangely calm. He looked toward Min-jae. "You still don't understand." Min-jae stepped forward. "Understand what?" Ji-hoon smiled bitterly. "I spent my entire life helping you build an empire, and everyone called you the genius. I was invisible. You inherited admiration. I earned mine." Min-jae shook his head. "I would have shared everything." "No," Ji-hoon replied quietly. "You shared success. I wanted significance." The officers placed handcuffs around his wrists. As they led him away, he never looked back. That evening, the mansion finally felt peaceful for the first time in days. The staff laughed softly over dinner. Mrs. Kang smiled again. Min-jae thanked every employee personally. Then he turned toward Adaobi. "If you hadn't kept those recordings, my family would have lost everything." She answered gently. "I didn't save your family. You did. You simply decided to face the truth." Min-jae smiled for the first time since the engagement dinner. But before anyone could truly celebrate, a detective approached with one final file. "Mr. Kang, we've discovered something else." Min-jae frowned. "What is it?" The detective placed several financial statements on the table. Ji-hoon wasn't working alone. The room fell silent. Someone else, someone powerful, had financed the entire conspiracy from the beginning. Just when they believed justice had arrived, a darker truth opened its eyes. But before we reveal how it all ends, take a second to subscribe if you haven't already. If this story has kept you on the edge of your seat, you're going to love the next one waiting for you on Afro-Korean TV. Now, let's see whether justice finally wins. Sometimes, the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies, it's refusing to become like them. For Kang Min-jae, the final battle wasn't about money or power. It was about deciding what kind of man he wanted to be. The detective placed the confidential file on the table. The financial trail is complete. Min-jae opened it carefully. Page after page revealed the truth. The hidden funding behind Ji-hoon's fraud didn't come from a mysterious criminal organization. It came from Han Group, Seo-yeon's own family. For years, they had quietly accumulated debt while pretending to be one of Korea's strongest business dynasties. Their solution had been simple. Marry Seo-yeon into the Kang family. Gain influence, transfer key assets. Then slowly absorb Min-jae's company until there was nothing left to steal. The engagement had never been about love. It had been an acquisition. Min-jae closed the file. For the first time, he felt no anger, only clarity. Investigators arrived before sunrise. Reporters gathered outside the gates. Television helicopters circled overhead. Financial crimes investigators entered the mansion carrying warrants. Within hours, the carefully built image of the Han family collapsed. Frozen accounts, seized documents, corporate fraud investigations. The empire they had spent decades protecting crumbled in a single day. Seo-yeon stood silently in the center of the living room as investigators carried away boxes of evidence. Her father refused to look at her. Her mother blamed her for everything. For the first time in her life, there was no one left to protect her from the consequences of her own choices. Days later, Seo-yeon requested one final meeting with Min-jae. They met in a quiet park overlooking the Han River. No photographers, no lawyers, no bodyguards. Just two people standing among the ruins of what could have been. She looked nothing like the elegant woman who once commanded every room. The confidence was gone. "So," she whispered, "this is how it ends." Min-jae looked at the river before answering. "It ended the day you chose pride over kindness." Tears welled in her eyes. "I loved you." He nodded slowly. "I believe part of you did. But the part that loved power always loved it more." She lowered her head. For the first time, she had no argument, no excuse, no one else to blame. As Min-jae walked away, she didn't call after him. Some endings don't need another conversation. They need acceptance. A week later, the Kang Corporation held a press conference. Journalists expected another announcement about profits or restructuring. Instead, Min-jae introduced a completely different initiative. Standing beside his mother and Adaobi, he addressed the nation. My company was almost destroyed because good people remained silent while others were mistreated. That ends today. He announced the creation of the Hyejin Foundation, named after his mother. Its mission was simple: to provide legal protection, scholarships, emergency financial assistance, and fair employment standards for domestic workers, caregivers, cleaners, and service employees across South Korea. The room erupted in applause. Mrs. Kang quietly wiped away tears. She never imagined that one act of cruelty would inspire so much compassion. After the ceremony, Min-jae privately handed Adaobi an envelope. Inside was a check worth more money than she had ever seen. You earned this. Adaobi smiled warmly before closing the envelope and handing it back. I didn't help because I wanted a reward. He looked surprised. What do you want then? She answered without hesitation. Promise me that no one who works for you will ever feel invisible again. Min-jae extended his hand. You have my word. No, Adaobi replied with a smile. I have your actions. The two shared a quiet laugh. Months passed. The mansion slowly became a different home. Employees laughed openly. Suggestions were welcomed. No one feared speaking honestly. Mrs. Kang often joined the staff for afternoon tea, insisting everyone sit together instead of standing to serve her. Respect was no longer reserved for those with wealth. It belonged to everyone. Eventually, Adobe's contract came to an end. She packed the same suitcase she had arrived with. Only this time, she wasn't leaving with just memories. She had earned enough to return home and reunite with her family. The entire household gathered at the airport to say goodbye. Mrs. Kang embraced her tightly. You came here as an employee. You leave as family. Adaobi smiled through tears. I'll never forget this home. As boarding was announced, Min-jae walked beside her one final time. I keep thinking, he admitted, if you hadn't been here. Adaobi gently interrupted him. I wasn't here by accident. He looked confused. She smiled. Sometimes, God answers prayers by sending people who don't look important. She picked up her suitcase. And sometimes, the strongest person in the room is the one nobody notices. With one final wave, she disappeared through the boarding gate. Min-jae stood beside his mother, watching until the aircraft became a tiny silver dot above the clouds. Mrs. Kang slipped her hand into his. You've changed, he nodded. I thought protecting my family meant giving them comfort. He looked toward the sky. Now I know. It means giving them courage. Mrs. Kang smiled. Your father would be proud. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Some emotions are too deep for words. Life has a way of revealing people's true character. Not when everything is easy, but when power is challenged. Han Seo-yeon lost everything because she believed respect could be demanded. Park Ji-hoon lost everything because envy became more important than loyalty. But Adaobi, a woman many people overlooked, changed an entire family's future because she chose courage over comfort and truth over silence. As for Kang Min-jae, he didn't become a better man because he built a successful company. He became a better man the moment he stopped protecting his reputation and started protecting the people who had always protected him. Because in the end, the strongest foundations aren't built with money. They're built with love, integrity, and the courage to stand up when it matters most. Treat every person with dignity. You never know who will change your life.